How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 2.
Welcome back. It's Eric Erickson here across the United States, live from Jacksonville, Florida, where I'm helping with the WOKV Children's Hospital fundraiser down here and doing my show and also doing, I got a lot of radio to do today, y'all. Prayers appreciated. But given the setup, being at the hospital doing my show and then also doing their care-a-thon, I don't have access to phones today. So you just have to listen to me talk and all the clips of audio and things like that. Fun times. So I've had several people ask me if I would do this and do, if you will, a state of play on everything. Because let me give you my starting proposition here. Essentially, people are asking, can you talk about, the House and the Senate? And not just the presidency. Everybody's so focused on the presidency, but for example, the House matters. So, for example, in the House of Representatives, 435 seats. You've got some that are reliable seats. You've got some that are swing seats. You got some that usually are reliable seats, but sometimes not reliable seats. So how does that shape up? Essentially, there are 21 seats that are toss-ups for the House of Representatives. You have 8 that lean Republican, 16 that are likely Republican, 185 guaranteed Republican seats. Due to redistricting, the Democrats have 179 firm seats, 19 likely, 13 lean. So you've got that 21. Now, where do those 21 districts? Well, you've got some in Michigan, couple in Ohio, few in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, New York, Maine. You got New Hampshire. You got some in Arizona. You've actually got some in California and up the West Coast. There really aren't a lot of those swing districts in, for example, Georgia or Tennessee or Florida. They tend to be in the West and the Mid-Atlantic and New England. And then, of course, you've got Ohio 9, Marcy Capture. You've got Michigan 8, held by Dan Kildee. Michigan 7 by Elise Slotkin. And these are the wild card seats. You got Don Bacon in Nebraska 2, although I don't actually think Don's in trouble in Nebraska 2. You've got, where else do you have them? You got them in Colorado. You got a number of swing seats out there. And the state of play is 20 swing seats to 21. I don't think Don Bacon is really a swing seat, so I'm going to give it to the GOP, but that still gives you 20 seats. But it's not just the House. You also have the United States Senate. You have, right now, if the election were held today, the Republicans would have 50 seats. You have two true swing districts right now, Montana and Ohio. Montana is probably an easier pickup than Ohio because Sherrod Brown is a retail good politician and Bernie Moreno is a new guy. He was a J.D. Vance friend. J.D. Vance supported him. And, Vance underperformed all the Republicans in Ohio, and Moreno might potentially do that as well. If it's a 50-50 Senate, then of course the GOP needs to win the presidency. If you really want to win the presidency, you need to pick up Ohio, you need to pick up Montana. And then there are 5 seats that lean Democrat. They're not considered swing districts. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada. Does that sound familiar? If Donald Trump can do well in those Senate seats or in those states, then the Senate seats probably come along, and frankly, the congressional seats do as well. Now, why? Let me explain this to you. There used to be a lot of ticket switching in the nation. That is, people would vote Republican for president and Democrat down ballot. That tends to be how it used to be. Reagan, for example, had a Democratic House and Senate, even though he had that massive landslide in 1980. You had these people, they called them accidental senators. There were a number of Republicans who got elected in 1980 who had no business getting elected, but they did. And they got elected because the country Reagan had coattails. And they were all gone in 1986. Pretty much every single one of them lost again. We had this one term. So Reagan came in, was able to pick up the Senate, but then they lost it. Even though he had a landslide in 1984, Republicans did okay. The reality is that there is less ticket splitting now. And of course, in 96, Republicans did okay in Congress, and Bill Clinton got reelected over Bob Dole. People voted for Clinton as a Democratic president and Republican down ballot. Now that happens less and less. If you vote Republican president, you tend to vote Republican down ballot. If you vote Democrat for president, you vote Democrat down ballot. So as the states go for the presidency, so too goes the House and the Senate. And there are worries among Republicans right now that maybe they could lose the House and not pick up the Senate, depending on how Trump's presidential race goes. That's why so much hinges now on the quality of the candidate. And, after the Democratic convention last night, as I said the first hour, I don't know that she's going to get a big bounce out of it. I really don't. But at the same time, I do think the Democrats are more unified now, and they do have more energy than they had. And Republicans are more divided. The Trump team going after Brian Kemp just reminded Republicans, oh my gosh, I don't like this guy. A number of his statements, he should never have done that. And the needling of Trump's supporters towards Republicans. I mean, here in Georgia, you've also got them, they're attacking the very popular attorney general. They're not just attacking the governor. You've got some Trump supporters who are actually calling for Brian Kemp, the governor, to be locked up in the state. This doesn't help. These people are their own worst enemy. If you want to win the election, you need to unify your side, not call for your popular Republican governor to be thrown in jail, as some of them are doing. And that's playing out around the country. There are deep divisions on the Republican side between Trump supporters and not. They got to find some unity again. They were real united and real excited over the defeat of Joe Biden. Not so much anymore. At the same time, there are Republicans who don't like Donald Trump, who are not going to vote in Trump versus Biden. But because Kamala Harris is so far left and has such radical economic policies, got a lot of Republicans. I know a number of Republicans who are like, oh man, I don't like the guy, but Kamala Harris is such a wackadoo progressive. I got to go vote for him. So I don't know how that dynamic plays out. And I don't think we're going to until after the first debate. I think if the election were held today, not only would Donald Trump win, but the Republicans would take the Senate and they would make up some ground in the House of Representatives. Right now, though, everything is very, very divided. So both sides have to be on their A game. And that's part of a problem when you have an undisciplined candidate like Donald Trump. That's part of the problem when you have a walking word salad like Kamala Harris. Very hard for either side to be super disciplined. The media will tell you that the Democrats are united and that they are super disciplined, but there actually were a lot of divisions on stage, I think, at the Democratic National Convention. I think it's a problem. You can have all your surprise celebrities, Oprah Winfrey and the like there, but I don't think it matters if at the end of the day there is a constituency, a 401k constituency among Democrats who, if Kamala Harris's economic vision scares them, they may sit it out. They don't have to vote for Donald Trump. And that, too, would help Donald Trump, just sitting it out. These sorts of things matter. I think Arizona is gone for the GOP when it comes to the Senate. Those of you in Arizona, I love you. I'm glad you're listening to me. But Kari Lake is a terrible nominee for the Senate. She lost the gubernatorial race, and she's actually made herself more unpopular since then. Last night, you had Ruben Gallego, who's running for the Senate. He was on stage at the Democratic National Convention. He's actually pretty progressive. He'll definitely be a progressive in the Senate. And right now he's winning it. I mean, every poll there and the ground game momentum. The other problem the Trump team has is they've outsourced their ground game to third parties, led by Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA. And that's not a good thing. They've relied on a lot of volunteers. Like in Georgia, for example, Kamala Harris has something like 3 to 4 times as many paid operatives in the state of Georgia as the Trump campaign. The same is holding true in Pennsylvania, by the way. A must-win state for both sides, Pennsylvania. The Republicans have less than half the number of paid operatives as the Democrats. In Arizona, it's the same thing. The Republicans are relying on volunteers. The Democrats are relying on paid staff. Now, the upside is the GOP finally realizes it. They need to pay people, so they're starting to make the shift, and there's plenty of time for them to make the shift. They got to make the shift from volunteer to paid. That's part of the problem, though, is they haven't been doing the aggressive door-to-door the Democrats have been doing to get people registered, get people's absentee ballots filled out, or their forms filled out so they can get their absentee ballots. The ground game matters tremendously. In fact, at the bottom of the hour, I want to actually talk about those dynamics because I used to run ground games for candidates. I can explain this one to you. But the lay of the land right now is this. It's too soon to tell. The reality is I still think that Donald Trump, it's his race to lose. When you look at the swing states, he's still doing well in the swing states. I think the more people learn about Kamala Harris, the more Kamala Harris exposes herself, and the more Kamala Harris has to debate Donald Trump, I think the worse she's going to do. That's my opinion. I could be wrong. We know the media is going to bat for her. I mean, you had a conversation on CNN last night during the convention about how she's actually smart to avoid the press. They're openly rooting for her not to take their questions. I think these sorts of things do matter. And I do actually think that if Donald Trump, bless his heart, if he can stay focused, if he can keep on the issues, I think he can win. I was a little bothered when he went to the border yesterday. He actually had a good moment at the border, but I was a little bit bothered in that he opened it by talking about 2020 and how he actually got the votes and talking about Joe Biden. I realize his crowd loves it, but that's what the media dwells on. And so it takes on this tone of they're going to focus on that and say, hey, we covered him. He talked about the stolen election. Just a matter of discipline there for Trump. But if he can focus, if he can stay on message, if the ad campaign can fire, there are a lot of ifs there, but they're all executable, very easily executable. I personally think if I had to call it right now, and right now is August, so things can change. Remember, events change things. But if I had to call the race right now in August, I'd say the Republicans maintain their hold on the House, gain the Senate, and gain the presidency. I think that if you gain the presidency, you absolutely gain the Senate. I think the House races follow. But right now, I actually do think that Trump's going to win. The Republicans will take the House and the Senate. It's going to be very close, and it's going to come down, obviously, to turnout. Duh. That turnout's going to matter. And while the Democrats have a greater ground game, I do think the latent Republican enthusiasm overcomes the lack of a ground game. There are enough Republicans who don't just want to vote for Donald Trump. They want to stop Kamala Harris. And I think those enthusiasm numbers actually surpass Democratic enthusiasm numbers in the data that I'm seeing. Things can change, though. This is August. We haven't had the debates. Kamala Harris hasn't had press conferences. She's probably not going to. There could be a recession. There could be more military turmoil. It's too soon to call it. But what I do want to tell you is there's a lot of reason to be optimistic, even as the media is painting a terribly, terribly pessimistic picture for people on the right. Hello and welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. Welcome back. So in the last segment, I talked about Trump's Georgia flub, and I guess people who weren't here in the first hour didn't hear. So I did mention in the first hour his tweet last night. And as I said earlier, I got lit up by people over this tweet. Thank you. And he actually did it on Twitter, by the way. Thank you, Brian Kemp, for all your help and support in Georgia, where a win is so important to the success of our party and, more importantly, our country. I look forward to working with you, your team, and all my friends in Georgia to help make America great again. Now, this comes on the heels of me pointing out and Politico pointing out that he has never enlisted Brian Kemp's ground game, and that Kemp doesn't really need an apology. He just wants Donald Trump to stop attacking him and his wife. And this is as close as Trump's going to come to oops, my bad, I shouldn't have done it, so good for him. I still think that what he did was problematic. and having his supporters even yesterday on social media saying that Kemp needs to be thrown in jail is problematic. But at the same time, there you go. He can't afford to lose Georgia. I do wonder what the polling's been showing. So anyway, for those of you just tuning in, now you can say, yes, I covered it again. But if you hear the first hour, you heard the better rendition because the first is always best. But nonetheless, it is worth noting again since I did focus on it. But all that's to say, the swing states, I still think Georgia favors Trump. Wisconsin favors Trump. I think Nevada favors Trump, and I do think Arizona favors Trump. I don't think Arizona favoring Trump is enough to get Kari Lake over. She's got her own problems. I do think, however, you have a Republican governor now in Nevada, and that matters. You also have Sam Brown out there running a very good campaign. It's a very good campaign. It still technically leans to the Democrats, but it's such a good campaign. I think Sam Brown matters out there. So all of that, my friends, is to say that I think that Donald Trump has an opportunity to become president. I do continue to believe that he's got to be more focused. He's got to do what J.D. Vance is doing. J.D. Vance was in Georgia yesterday. J.D. Vance gave interviews to local media. He's getting buzz. Now, Trump did go to the border, and he is getting attention in Arizona for going to the border. He had a lot of sheriffs there with him. He had the parents of one of the victims of illegal immigrant crime there, and that's good. In fact, I want to spend a little bit of time on that in the next segment as I talk about the turnout game and the ground game that everybody's been asking me about. So I want to explain to you how that sort of stuff is done, because those things do matter. But what also matters greatly in this sort of campaign is an aggressive, coordinated ground game. So we've covered the lay of the land. We've gotten the House. We got the Senate. We got where I think the race stands. I do think it stands in the Republicans' favor, despite all the hype this week about Kamala Harris. I do think so. What about the ground game? How do you actually run a ground game in a political campaign? For those of you who knew this, I've done this in the past, but I'm getting so many questions, and since I can't take phone calls today, since I'm here in Jacksonville at the hospital, if it sounds a little echoey, by the way, somebody emailed and said it sounds a little echoey, because it's the room that I'm in. But I want to explain that to you. First, though, speaking of ground game, if you want to join an army of activists that's not grifters but legit, Americans for Prosperity, AmericansForProsperity.org, they're a great group. They teach you how to be an effective conservative activist. They teach you how to be deployed in the ground game to make a difference. They teach you how to knock on your neighbor's door and persuade them. They teach you all of the information that you need. They teach you all of the arguments for sound public policy. They teach you how to advocate for freedom and for families and for small government. Americans for Prosperity, they're class acts, number one, but they're a do tank, not a think tank. They go into the states and they do the business of the conservative movement. And part of that is mobilizing conservative activists. That's why they have chapters in almost every state to mobilize conservative activists to make a difference in the country. All you have to do is go to AmericansForProsperity.org. AmericansForProsperity.org. You join Americans for Prosperity, and they, my friends, can turn you into an effective conservative activist and advocate for this country to get it fixed. AmericansForProsperity.org. Greetings from Jacksonville. It is Eric Erickson here across the United States, down here for their Children's Hospital fundraiser, doing my show and their show. So I had a couple people email and say, it sounds a little echoey. Well, given the room that I'm in, yeah, kind of, maybe you may be able to hear it. Probably if I said nothing, most of you would not notice it. So maybe I should shut up. But also, I can't take your phone calls because of the setup here. But that's okay. I've had enough requests this week for this, having moved on from Harris, moved on from Kemp and Trump and all that stuff. Let me just, and I may go back to it, but a lot of people, they hear about ground game and they want to know what goes into the ground game. And so I wanted to walk you through what it means to do a ground game. Let's start at the very, very basics here. So, and for background, for those of you who don't know, when I was a lawyer, I actually segued into running political campaigns. I've run them around the country. I've done federal, state, local campaigns, quite successful. I've won way more than I've lost. I'll put it to you that way. So how actually do you do a ground game? Here's what you need to know. And I should tell you as well that so Philip and my buddy Bill are like, your next book should really be a how to run for local office book, which is a passion of mine. I enjoyed campaigns. I don't do it now on radio. I've been I'll consult with friends of mine. Don't get paid. I just will sit down with them and let them pick my brain on running campaigns. I don't do it though. I don't run campaigns anymore because I feel like it's a conflict of interest. So people can listen to me here and gain some insight into how they want to run their races. So let's begin at the very beginning. Every county in America is divided into precincts. Those precincts have common populations and geographic boundaries into which people vote. When you go vote, you show up at a voting precinct. Some voting precincts are very large, some are small. It depends on the population, it depends on the size, it depends on the rules for the state. But precincts do not frequently change. There are updates to precincts on occasion, but more often than not, your precinct is your precinct is your precinct. So if you want to run for office, one of the things you need to do is you need to find out how many voters are in the precinct. And then you need to find out how many votes you need. Now, here's the thing. Some precincts lean Republican and some precincts lean Democrat. If you're a Republican and you got to look at a Democratic precinct, what you need to see is how many Republican votes can I pull out of this precinct if I play my hand right? I'm not going to win the precinct, but can I pull enough votes out that it helps me elsewhere? What you want to do is you want to go to the Board of Elections and you want to say, give me the last time, and I'm going to use the presidential race, okay, because that would work. So give me the 2020 presidential turnout by precinct in my county. Also, here's the other thing you have to get. Give me the total voting population in 2020 per precinct and the total population of voters now. Why does that matter? Some precincts go up in population. Some precincts go down. So let's take a precinct where let's say in 2020, Donald Trump won the precinct and he won it with 1,000 votes. Now, let's say the percentage of voters in that precinct has gone up 10%. What we need now in a voting precinct that Donald Trump won with 1,000 votes, Donald Trump now needs to wring out 10% more. So what's that? 100 more votes. So 1,100 votes. So then you get the list of voters per precinct from your election board, from the state Secretary of State. And every precinct in every county, every voter is assigned coding based on whether or not they vote in Republican primaries or Democratic primaries, or they don't vote in primaries at all. They may be a general-only voter. They may be a hard Republican. They may be a soft Republican. They may be a hard Democrat. They may be a soft Democrat. What you want to do is you want to go find the general-only voters for the general election, and you want to have someone knock on their door and figure out what their issue is. Now, you may be able to get a psychographic profile of them. So, for example, a lot of outside companies, I work with one. In fact, if you text Army to 33777 and give me your contact info, I'm using a program that actually can tie in voter registration, so I can find out what you're interested in. If you're in their database, you may not be in their database, but if you are, then I can see, and every political action group in the country can see based on your data. From, for example, your cable company. Your cable company sells the data. Well, it turns out you watch Fox News a lot, according to your cable company. Or you subscribe to the NRA magazine. You're probably a gun rights activist. Your cable subscriber tells companies that you subscribe, that you watch Fox News a lot or Newsmax. Well, you're probably one of us. You're a general-only voter. You don't vote in primaries, but you lean right. So the door knockers are going to go try to knock on your door. Or let's say you're a soft Democrat. And it turns out, based on the pattern, that the reason you're a soft Democrat is you're showing up in years where you're sheriff. You live in a county that is Democrat, and you vote in Democratic primaries that year, but you vote in Republican primaries in presidential election years. Well, you're probably a Republican in a Democratic county who's got to vote for Democratic sheriff. So I want to send a door knocker to you as well. And I want to try to persuade you to vote for me based on issues. And I want to try to persuade you to get an absentee ballot or to vote early. And I want to start targeting mail to remind you to vote. What you do now is you have your number. I need 1,100 people in this precinct. And your goal is to have enough volunteers that between, say, July and November, your nomination is secured. From July to November, you want some person to have knocked on that voter's door and to have knocked on the doors of those 1,100 people in the precinct you know you need. And if you do that, and you do it per precinct in your county, and so you've knocked on enough doors in the county and you have a favorable response, the odds are you're going to do very well. Paid operatives who it's their full-time job do better than volunteers. And this is a problem for the Republicans right now. They've been relying on volunteers. The Democrats have been relying on paid operatives. Paid operatives, it's their day job. Volunteers, you do it when you have time. So the Democratic ground game has been more robust than the Republican ground game. But it all works the same way. You identify in each precinct the number of voters you need to win the precinct or do as well as possible. If you're a Republican running a Democratic precinct or a Democrat running in a Republican precinct, how many Democrats can I draw out of there to offset and mitigate the Republican gains? If you're disciplined about this and you take the time to do it, you can win a race. And it's the same thing, by the way. It works in a primary. You pull the votes, you see how many typical voters in your party turn out for a primary. You find the hard Republicans or the hard Democrats. Those are people who vote in every primary, and you go knock on their doors. You forget the general voters. If it's a primary, why go knock on the door of someone who's never going to vote in a primary? Knock on the doors of the people who do. There are some registered voters who don't vote. You don't waste your time with those people. Low propensity voters favor Donald Trump, so his team is going to need to spend more resources knocking on the doors of people who occasionally vote. Kamala Harris will be able to spend time knocking on the doors of those who regularly vote. Trump, go for the people who don't often vote. And that's what you do. And you do that in every state. Now, every state has nuances. Every state's a little different. But by and large, you vote in a Democrat or Republican primary. In my state, it's considered an open primary. So you just show up on election day and say, I want the Republican ballot. Some states have closed primaries where you have to affirmatively have registered on your voter registration form as a Republican or Democrat, and that's the ballot you're assigned in the primary. But you know who turns up, and you know in the general election, each precinct has a percentage has a number of voters. But not all registered voters show up and vote. So you don't waste your time with every voter in the precinct because not every voter actually votes. You figure out who regularly votes, who votes in general elections, who regularly and reliably votes, who's in your party, and you show up and make contact with those people. There are two groups of people you don't waste your time with: the regular, reliable partisans and the people who never vote. The regular, reliable partisans, they're going to show up anyway. They don't need you to remind them. The people who never vote, they're never going to vote, so why waste your time? So you find the people who only vote in the general election. You find the people who have a propensity to vote, but not regularly. You find the people who turn out in the presidential election, and you don't know who they are. You show up, you knock on their door, you get a feel, your volunteers get a feel for who that person is, how they vote, what their interests are. This actually isn't hard. This is what campaigns are supposed to do. This is what good campaigns do. This is what I did in my career. I remember I got a candidate friend of mine who's listening right now, I assure you, and he's a judge. He's now a federal judge, but he was running for Superior Court. We made it into the runoff. I knew based on the data that he was going to win the race. His opponent was ahead. The votes had slowed down, but because we had done the work we needed to do, because we had the precincts done, because we knew, and this, by the way, was a nonpartisan race. But we knew his voters and we knew the other guy's voters. We knew our strong precincts. We knew his strong precincts. And his strong precincts were the ones who were votes were counting first. But his strong precincts weren't turning out at a high rate. Our precincts were consistently turning out at a high rate. So I knew when the opponent's big precincts came in, even though he was ahead of us, even though my candidate's dad was in another room telling him, son, you're going to lose this race. You need to be prepared for what you're going to say and your optimism. I knew based on the data that was coming in, we were going to win the race because our precincts were coming in at a higher rate than the other guys. And that's what happens on election day. It doesn't matter whether you're the president of the United States. It doesn't matter if you're running for dog catcher. If you do your homework and you build your precinct map and you know precinct by precinct, county by county, congressional district by congressional district, where your voters are, and you can see that they're coming in and the rate they're coming in, the percentage that you're turning over, the number of contacts you've made, are those people going to vote? You can tell that you've won. What you do on election day is you make sure you have a phone baker and they're calling saying, hey, our poll workers and watchers at your precinct say you haven't showed up yet. Most poll watchers are able to figure out who's there. You hire watchers, you get them there. They're from the precinct. They know the people. They know who they're looking for. Hey, Bob Jones hasn't showed up today. Nobody's seen him. Somebody call him, tell him to get here. The more you implement your ground game, your get out the vote plan, the better the campaign works. It's not rocket science. You go to campaign management school. I went to campaign management school. This is what you do. The problem for the Republicans right now is they're behind on this. They've outsourced it to third parties. Those third parties don't have a track record of winning these things. They're not doing it at the campaign level. They lack the money, and the campaigns themselves are relying on volunteers. The Democrats have a very robust ground game. I think that Trump's enthusiasm pushes him across the finish line right now. But there's still a lot of time left in the election for the enthusiasm gap to close. Those sorts of things matter on a practical day-to-day basis. But that's what you do. That's how you run a ground game. You figure out what the precincts are, how many voters are in the precinct, how often those voters turn out, the percentage of turnout, the growth or decline in the number of voters in the precinct, and then you go find them and you knock on the doors and you convince those people to vote for you. It's sweat equity, and it works. You know what else works? Vision computers. They'll make you a computer that'll work. They'll build it for you. If you have a computer that's not from Vision Computers, well, they will take over the tech support for your computer. All you have to do, $179 a year per computer. Vision Computers can be your tech support solution. So you don't have to have the in-house IT guy. You can save that money and just have Vision Computers. And your employees, they can get a special number. They call 15 seconds or less. They get the answer to what's plaguing their computer. All you got to do is call Vision Computers at 404-COMPUTE. 404-COMPUTE, or go to visioncomputers.com. Tell Vision Computer you want to work with them. They can build you PCs, and if they build you your computer, the tech support comes with it. But if you've already got a computer and you're struggling, your employees are struggling, Vision Computers can take over the care and maintenance of your computers. They can even, in many cases, remote in to fix the computers. They do email and printer support, so your employees can be productive at their jobs, and Vision Computers can keep them productive by keeping up their computers. All you got to do, go to visioncomputers.com or call them at 404-COMPUTE. If you call them at 404-COMPUTE, tell them Eric sent you, you're going to get an even better deal. Visioncomputers.com or 404-COMPUTE. Apparently, last night, the special guest at the Democratic National Convention was the friends we made along the way. It was you guys. What a wild moment. So they claimed there was going to be a very special guest. They even erected a curtain so that you couldn't see who was coming out on stage. There were all sorts of rumors, led by TMZ, no less. It was going to be Taylor Swift. It was going to be Beyonce. It was going to be someone famous, a special celebrity coming out right before Kamala Harris. It was nobody. It was nobody. It was a wild moment. And some of this, I guess, in fairness, was irrational exuberance by the media. But the Democrats fed into the rumor. The Democrats themselves were claiming there would be a surprise guest. I don't know. Somebody's going to write the story on the surprise guest. They claimed it was going to be, well, they didn't make any statement, but a lot of word got out. It was Beyonce. Beyonce's people released a statement saying, nope, not going to be her. There was also the Taylor Swift. I said, hey, maybe, remember all those conspiracy theorists on the right who thought that Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift were going to get engaged at the Super Bowl to help Joe Biden? Maybe instead it would be Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift standing on stage at the DNC getting engaged. And all those people say, see, we were right. It just wasn't the Super Bowl. It was the DNC, but we were right. Nope. Turned out just to be you and me. We were the special guests in Kamala's night. I got to say again, listen, I've gotten hate mail. I'm used to the hate mail these days, but it is a factually true statement that her speech was better than Donald Trump's speech. It was more concise and thematic. It wasn't rambling. Was it substantive? Absolutely not. Of course it wasn't substantive. And I did. And again, I realize I'm repeating myself for the first hour, but Dana Bash coming on CNN, who I know and I like, is a friend, but she said she had a lot of policy. She didn't have policy. She had platitudes. The platitudes were related to policy positions, but there was no substance in the policy positions. She wants Americans to have affordable homes. Rah, rah, rah. That's not a policy. That's a platitude. But the speech was good at an emotional level. The Republican strategy has to be to make it a substantive election. Make it about the issues. She can't win on the issues. And her speech was a tell that she can't win on the issues. And that should be eye-opening for the GOP. You've got an avenue here. You can pursue this if you have the discipline to do it. And honestly, my concern is a little bit that the Republicans actually lack that level of discipline to be able to do what I think they need to do when it comes time to advocating this particular this particular frame.